Jay, good day, everybody. So, you might have seen the title of this lecture, which is God is not only good. I'm not saying I agree with the statement. I'm saying it's the title for the lecture. Okay? So, firstly, my question to you. Is God always good? Or is God only good? What do you think? Always. He's always good. He's both. He's always good. He's beyond good and bad, very spiritual. He is also in the bad. Okay, so we have many opinions, many versions. And I guess it depends who you ask and when you ask them, possibly also. If you ask God for something and He doesn't give it to you, let's see if you still see Him as being always good, right? Whether if you ask God for help for overcoming some obstacles, but He's actually, and afterwards you get more obstacles, then what happens? Is good? God's still good? Give you some other examples. If your mother is dying, whether it is from old age or disease or whatever it may be, and you ask God for help and she dies anyway, is He still good? I've seen many times people approaching Guruji and asking, please help, pray for my mother, my father, they're very sick. And Guruji says, I will pray for them. The next day they die. That's why I remember a few times now, recently, when people approach Guruji and ask him, please pray for my parents, Guruji says, you want them to die? Because that's what usually happens when I pray for people. Right? We don't know if that's good or bad. I'm sure if Guruji prays is good. And so I think sometimes, not to say always, sometimes it is very difficult to perceive what is good and what is bad. And I would say that never it is actually possible to understand His perspective and His reasoning for why certain things are happening in life. Right? And I think we all know and understand that from a certain perspective, especially when we are neutral in the situation. But we so easily often go into this mood of blaming God. Whether it is conscious or very often, even more often, I would say unconsciously, where we complain, or even in the most subtle way of not being able to accept life, the way that it plays out in front of our eyes. Simply the fact of not being able to accept itself is already doubting the goodness of God in an extreme way. Although at the very least, the knowledge that He's behind everything that happens in this creation, and in His creation. It's not my creation, it's His one. As Krishna very clearly says, that there is nothing that moves without my will. And so everything that moves must be by His will. And so even the bad things that happen must be by His will also. Right? And as I said, sometimes it is very easy, or it is more easy to accept that reality. Sometimes it is more difficult. Like a couple of months ago, I'll give an example. Like I had my weekly satsang with the country that I still have left, which is Turkey. And if you might probably have heard, a couple of months ago, there was a very big earthquake in Turkey, right? And I could see that with many devotees, or speaking with some of the residents here, there is a very different perspective to those who are in Turkey, or watching from afar, to see a disaster, a natural disaster happen, is a very different perspective than if you live in that country or close geographically. And living close geographically is still a huge difference than if you actually lose somebody in such an earthquake or such a natural disaster. So depending how subjectively influenced or involved you are in the situation makes a huge difference in your ability to look at it objectively or to look at it from a broader perception, because it doesn't really affect you that much. And that's what I mean. When something doesn't affect that, it is very easy to see it as, to see God's hand in everything, because it's either nice or it is something bad which doesn't directly affect me, so it's not that bad. Right? Because we have compassion for people, but we can't really put ourselves in their shoes. Or at the very least, it's very difficult. Unless you have experienced something similar, then it's more easy. But if you're in that situation, it is often very difficult. Right? And there are actually many miracles that happen during those disasters also. That how people survive, how animals survive sometimes days and days under, stuck under the gravel and whatever else. And then it depends what you want to see. Because the reaction of people will often be, like in that example, many people reflected a lot of hatred towards certain people. For example, the architects that built the houses in a very bad way, that they were collapsed very easily, etc., etc. Right? And so again, it depends what you choose to look at and what you want to look at. Yeah. So I wanted to look at this topic in a little bit structured way. So firstly, I don't know if this works. Yes. So firstly, I wanted to very quickly look at who is God. Right? There's many ways in how we can look at it. I wanted to look at quickly the idea of what is good and what is bad. And then I want to actually share a couple of examples and Lilas of some stories of the Lord, which I chose to try to highlight this topic. Let's start. So who is God? Very quickly, give me a few answers. Who is God to you? Ignore this for now. Who is God to you? God is everything. Okay, that's a bit boring. It's true, but what else? Who is God to you? Guruji. Sure. What else? Narayana. He has a name, a form. What else? A dear friend. A dear friend. But in terms of, not as names or forms or whatever, but in terms of your relationship with God. Like, who do you perceive God to be in your life? Love. Very nice. What else? Light. It's Diwali. It's good. Peace. A source of energy. Yeah. Awareness. Very nice. So we have heard many different ways on how to view who and what God is. So I wanted to look at it from these 3 points. And I don't go too much into detail because it's not the point of this lecture. And you know this from the devotee course. Right? So the first is definition, nature, and qualities. So the definition of God is impossible to make an actual definition. Because to be able to define who God is, you need to use words. And God cannot be defined by words. And as we just seen, that which is undefinable, everybody that pursues that undefinable truth has a different relationship to it. And so the way that reality or that thing that we call God is perceived is different from person to person. Just as Krishna also says in the beginning of chapter 4, verse 11, he says that no matter how one approaches me, I will approach him in the same way. So he's not limited in this way or in that way. It is simply depends on you. What is your relationship with God? We know the 5 different bhavas in which we relate to God. And so everybody has a different relationship with God. And so naturally, everybody views God differently. But I think the definition that was mentioned first was a very nice, accurate one. God is everything. It's a good, I think everything kind of takes everything into consideration. So it's a good way to define him if we need to. Secondly, in terms of nature, right? We know, these 5 points. He is Jnanam, Satyam, Anandam, Amalatva, Emanantata. So he has all of these qualities in its supreme form. We are part of that supreme being also, but very different. We have the same nature, but in its quality, but not in its quantity. Just as we know from the Gita in chapter 15, Krishna says that we are just a fraction of that supreme being that becomes the jiva, the embodied jiva, the embodied soul. And it acquires the 5 senses and the mind within this material nature. And so we are a fraction of that supreme being. We have the same in terms of quality, but just a fraction of that, right? And so the qualities, how can we define God? We'd already said can vary very much. We can say, we can put all these amazing qualities to God. He's loving, he's compassionate, he's humble, he's beautiful, he's splendor, all of these amazing things, right? In the Gita also, whether you take, starting, for example, chapter 7, chapter 10, Krishna gives so many ways on qualities and so many ways on how you can perceive God. So you can say, yes, God is the fire, God is the water, God is the earth, God is the shark among fish, and all the other examples that he gives. But then what did he say in the end, after the entire list of things, how we can re-recognize in this world? This is just but a fraction of myself. I sustain all of this just by a fraction of myself. So that doesn't seem to be a very accurate description of who he actually is. Because yes, he is all of those amazing things which we can see, but it is just this much, if at all, of who he truly is. So to define him is impossible. And like I said, in terms of qualities, everybody will define God differently in terms of quality that they see in God, according to what is their relationship with God. Because if you're a devotee of God, yes, you will see God as a loving God. You will see God as a compassionate God. If you're in Abrahamic religions, you might see God as a strict God also. In Hinduism also, sometimes. The guru can be strict also, right? Yeah, you're never. Depends on perception, right? Like you saw yesterday, Swami Anura did a great job, right, with moderating. Why do you have to talk in between every time? Do you think people want to hear your voice? Right? I don't know, maybe you didn't hear it. I was sitting next to him. Right? Everybody heard. Right? So it's always a question of perception. Right? The guru can be very strict. That doesn't mean that he's not compassionate. Maybe he's the most compassionate. That is why he is strict. Right? Sometimes the parents are very strict to you, but it's not because they don't love you. It's because they love you that they are strict. Do you see that in that moment? Not really. Right? Sometimes parents are just annoying. That's not the parents' perspective, that's the children's perspective. Right? And so I would say that, coming to the next part, what is duality? Obviously we know that this material nature, this material creation exists of duality. There is not, without duality it wouldn't exist. We would not even be able to perceive separation between things. So everything here is built on that principle, where there's heat and cold, pleasure, pain. And Krishna speaks about this all the time in the Bhagavad Gita. That this reality is made up of this concept of duality. And that is why we have likes and dislikes. And I feel like this is why it's a nice topic for Diwali. Because what is Diwali about? What do you do on Diwali? You light candles. You make light. But why do you make light? To get rid of the darkness, right? So why would you put a light if there is no darkness? So we need darkness so that we can celebrate Diwali, right? Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. We only recognize knowledge if there is ignorance. If there was no ignorance, then why would there be knowledge? It would just be a state of being. If there was no cold, it was only heat, then you don't have a contrast to feel it. If there is no winter, then you'll not appreciate the summer. Or vice versa, if you prefer winter. Right? We could say there is good weather and there's bad weather. But what does that mean? If you ask me, what is good weather? I would say sunshine and warm. But if you ask what is warm, some people would say 30 degrees starts warm. For some people, it starts 20. So again, the understanding of what is warm is already different. If you ask somebody else, they won't say, actually, good weather for me is rainy and cloudy. Or foggy. Some people love foggy weather. Right? You can stay on the couch, watch some movies. Some people love winter. Snowy, cold, crisp, fresh air. Right? It's amazing. Some people hate it. So again, what is good and what is bad? It's very subjective. Just as everything in this world that we perceive from our perception is our subjective perception. And that is important to understand. Everything that we perceive is our own subjective opinion and our own subjective experience. And that varies from person to person. Right? And that is often or usually the problem when living in communities or when living in the world in general. That is why every religious war has happened. Because the problem is not that somebody has a subjective opinion. The problem starts when somebody with a subjective opinion believes that it's an objective opinion. And actually that is not a problem yet. The problem only starts if two people think their subjective opinion is an objective opinion. Because then you have two objective opinions. And both cannot be true at the same time. Right? And so if one believes this form of God and this religion and this way towards God is the right one, and somebody else says the same thing, then what is it? Right? They can't both exist at the same time and both be equally true in their minds. Right? And that's the problem. Or that's the beauty, whatever you may see it, as duality. And so duality is a reality in which we live in this creation. And as long as we live in this creation, we cannot avoid it. It is a reality which we have to deal with. And so what the point that Krishna makes, to keep it short, in the Gita, is that we need to transcend it. We have to attain the state of equanimity, which Krishna speaks about in various parts of the Gita. Equanimity in which is higher or above good and bad, in which one goes through life accepting whatever may be perceived by some as good and by some as bad. And I want to take one example from the Srimad Bhagavatam, from Canto 4, Chapter 29, verse 30 and 31. I think I gave satsang about it some time ago. I remembered it. So he says that the living entity is exactly like a dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, he sometimes receives punishment and is driven away, and at other times he receives a little food to eat. Similarly, the living entity, being influenced by so many desires, wanders in different species of life according to his destiny or karma. Sometimes he is high and sometimes he is low. Sometimes he goes to the heavenly planets and sometimes he goes to hell, and so on and so forth. And so here is nicely described how the soul, the Atma, wanders through all these different types of species and forms of life and states of mind. And so the perception of life changes. So we can see the duality of things here. And actually for me, this was one of the very first verses that I really connected to from the Bhagavad Gita. And that is chapter 2, verse 14, in which Krishna says that the reality, as long as we are in this reality, the experience of the duality of pleasure and pain, heat and cold, they are normal. So the wise do not get disturbed by it. They simply accept the fact that it is reality and they don't get disturbed by it. And so the tip that Krishna gives and how to deal with it is what? He says simply, endure. Later he gives the example of the tide, of the waves that come and they go. You can't do anything about it. The only thing you can do is to accept it. And similarly in life also, sometimes they come and they go. Sometimes problems come and they go. Sometimes good times come and they go. But you cannot do anything about it because you're not in control of life. Sure, you have some perceivable choices, but actually in the bigger picture of life, you have no way on how you can actually control life. And so it comes and it goes. As we can see with, some things we think we can choose, some things we cannot, that are outside of our control. Like the example that I gave with the earthquake, right? We cannot choose not to have an earthquake. Who would choose to have an earthquake? Nobody, right? And so it comes and it goes. All you can do is endure, accept this reality, don't become attached to it. That's what it means to keep moving, to endure, not to become attached to it, but accept the reality of it and move forward. So the question is, why would you do that? Because it is very easy to say it, but it's very difficult to actually do it. Yeah, I don't get attached to it. And then tomorrow morning you get up and the water from the shower is cold. And then what? Yeah. You're still detached? You throw it, that doesn't matter if it's warm or cold. It doesn't matter. Right? And then you realize, actually, maybe there's still some kind of attachment that I have to the duality. And so as Krishna says, the aim is to attain the state of equanimity. But how is that possible to achieve? And I would say that and I'll come to that in the very end, the only way to actually achieve that is to realize that there is something higher than this duality that we perceive. There is something that is more special, more beautiful, and more precious than that which we perceive as good or bad. As you said, he is beyond good or bad in the beginning, right? And so the only way on how to transcend good or bad or duality is by focusing on that which is beyond good or bad. Right? As Guruji always said, that what you focus on is what you become. And so if you focus on things that are within material creation and duality, what else do you expect to come from them if you focus on them? But if you focus on that which is beyond, that is also what you shall attain, naturally. And we'll come to that point later. Yeah. So I wanted to take a few examples to show you the amazing mercy and compassion that the Lord has. And just to give a bit of perspective, on these different Lilas. And I chose a few, we'll go through them, and I'll tell you why I try to take these for the lecture called God is Not Only Good. which I'm not sure if I agree with, because I think in the ultimate sense, God is always good. But sometimes perception might be deceiving. So the first Lila I want to talk about is the Lila of Jaya and Vijaya. So we know as a bigger picture in the Srimad Bhagavatam, if you have heard satsangs or read the Bhagavatam to parts, you might have noticed one thing, and that is that there are many curses thrown around. So my first question is, do you think cursing is a good thing? Yes. I swear all the time. I curse all the time. From Guruji. Okay, that's a different... Okay, so first you said to curse is a good thing, but then you said cursing, if Guruji does it, is a good thing. So again, that's a different topic. But in general, I would say cursing is not a good thing, I suppose. Would you agree? Yeah? Why does somebody curse? That's the ultimate. Anger, disappointment, jealousy, all these kind of things. Emotions which we all have, but I think which we all know are qualities which we should probably better get rid of. Or at least not be controlled by them. Right? We would put them in the bad category. And it's a good thing. Because you know who else makes categories and hierarchies of what is good and bad? Krishna. Correct. Read chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita. It is literally called Devasura Sampad, the way of the gods and the way of the demons. Good and bad, right? How many verses does he spend on the good? 3, 4, right? How many on the bad? More, right? So Krishna very clearly highlights that there are these two things in the world. Naturally, they exist, right? And so I wanted to take this as a first example, not only because it's the cause of the other Lilas, which happen afterwards, but because it's a good example. Like I said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, you see many curses, right, left, center, whether it's from the great sages, the rishis, which are all, of course, very self-controlled beings. Durvasa is known as a self-controlled person who is able to control his anger at all times. Right? Yeah. Perception, right? So the same thing with Jaya and Vijaya is also, right? You all know the story? I don't have to go into too much detail. Right? So they didn't allow the 4 Kumaras to enter, the sons of Brahma to enter Vaikuntha to visit the Supreme Lord, because the Supreme Lord was resting and sleeping, and so they said, they sent these 4 children away, 4 naked children away, said you cannot enter. And so they became very upset. And so they cursed Jaya and Vijaya that they have to be, what? Born as human beings. Horrible. What a curse. Right? Scary thought. What would it be like to be cursed to live as a human being? Right? That's what every morning feels like. No. Right? So, they were, of course, horrified because, of course, they're in a very elevated position. They're eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. And so they're terrified because, of course, they also know that curses cannot be taken back. Curses once spoken, they will be fulfilled. Right? That's the problem with the Bhagavatam. That's the good thing about nowadays, because it doesn't really work that way anymore, for most people at least. I know some people who have the curse or the blessing that it does work. But you have to be very aware of that also, right? If you know, because at that time, words were spoken much more consciously. And so the words that were spoken had a lot more power and strength behind them. And so when such elevated beings give curses, for sure they will come true. And so what happened is that the Jaya and Vijay, they go to their boss and say, we apologize, but we had a problem. It's like when the Mataji go to the boss and say, I got pregnant, I have to take a year of leave. So the Jaya Vijay, they go to Narayan and say, we were cursed. We have to be born as human beings, so we cannot do our duty anymore as gatekeepers. And so they have great regret, and they ask, what can we do about this? And so he says, okay, because I cannot take the curse back, but I can amend it. And so I give you 2 choices. It's always nice if you can choose, right? Sometimes I wish I couldn't, but Guruji would choose for me. But sometimes we do have choices in life, right? And so Narayana says, okay, I can amend it and make 2 offers for you. So you can choose either you have to be born 3 times as my greatest enemy, as demons, but you only have to be born 3 times. Or you can be born as my devotees, but you have to be born 100 times. What would you choose? What would you choose? And I'm asking you as devotees. Because they are devotees, right? They're not like, they're devotees of God. They're literally one of the most closest beings to Him. So what would you choose? These 3 lives must be more interesting. Because the life of a devotee is so boring. Who knows? Right? But wouldn't me as a devotee, wouldn't it be nicer to be a devotee of God? Could you imagine hating God? Not really, right? It's terrible even to think about it. You know the choice they made, right? They said we choose the 3 times as asuras, as demons, because then we get it over quickly, right? It's not 100 times separate, because I think it's a different perception. They said, we have such a longing for you, we don't want to be so long separate from you. So we take the shorter one, even if it means we have to hate you, right? Because it's shorter. So it depends what priority you put, whether you want to have the feeling or you want to have the separation, or the separation longer or shorter. Depends on your priorities, right? And I'd say the choice they made was very wise also. Because a wise person also understands, no matter how wise you are, how detached you are, how devoted you are, the reality or the truth of this material creation is that the more time you spend in it, the more danger there is that it will grab you, that it will catch you. And they said, okay, 3 lives sounds like like a less risk than coming 100 times. Because you don't know. If you come 100 times as devotees, we know so many Lilas and stories in which great beings become deluded. Again, whether it is by a deer or by a prostitute. It's different examples, right? Such pure beings forget about their path entirely. Just because of one instant. And so it can be very dangerous to be in this world. And so they said, okay, let it get over it quickly and move on, right? And so the Lord accepted, and he gave him the boon or the promise. He said that because you choose to be my enemy, I will personally come and defeat you also, right? And so firstly, I would say, again on this question, is it good or bad? I would say, again, depends on how you see it. But none of the incarnations of the Lord would have happened if it wasn't for them. Because the more negativity there is, the more negative nature and darkness there is, the more tempted the Lord will be to come and solve it himself. Because if there's only a little bit, the little small demons, as Guruji put it, why would I come for this? It's peanuts. But for the Lord to come, an equally negative force has to be there also. Otherwise, it's not a temptation for him. Right? If you want to challenge somebody in sports, you would usually choose somebody who is somewhat equal to your ability. Otherwise, it's just boring. If you play tennis with somebody who has never played tennis before, it's just boring because they will not even get a ball back, right? And so for the Lord also, why would he play with little demons if he doesn't even have to lift his finger? It's nothing. And so Jaya and Vijaya incarnated as these great asuras that conquered the entire world and all the worlds. They conquered Indralok, and there was such a threat to creation that he had to come to sort them out, right? And never forget, even though there were such great demons full of negativity and anger and pride, who are there in truth? There are still Jaya and Vijaya, right? And so that's my first point with this story, is there are many difficult choices that we have to make in life. There is many things which we seemingly can choose easily, and there's things which are chosen for us. And so we have to be very wise about the choices that we make. That's all that I want to say. Because, again, you can choose right or left. Jay and Vijay could have chosen to become devotees also. But their thinking, their reasoning was very wise of why they chose to make it short. And the effect of it, you can see, is amazing also. Yes, you can see there was great destruction and many killings and whatever else. But you can also say it is because of them that the Lord incarnated. It is because of him or them that we have the opportunity to connect to him. That he was forced to come in a form to live out his life, his Lilas, his stories, his names, that we can focus on now, right? Of course, in the end of the day, you can argue everything is his plan, so we don't really have a choice. But that's a supreme argument that we cannot talk about, otherwise it gets too boring, right? Similarly, in the Mahabharata itself, that's why I love the Mahabharata so much when it comes to choices. It's such an amazing scripture, because the Mahabharata is about dharma, about what is righteousness. Such a nice word, righteousness. Righteousness also brings unrighteousness, duality, both, right? The question is, what is righteousness, what is unrighteousness? So the whole Mahabharata is about this topic. And so when you read the Mahabharata, it's so amazing that each story, each character gives us the ability to think about. It is most of the time not just black and white. This is right, this is wrong. It is to look at, why does this character choose to do this or choose to do that? And to try to reflect on our own life and see, what do I do, or what would I do in that situation? And I take the example of Bhishma in the very beginning of the Mahabharata. There's many other examples. With the great choice that he had made, right? He chose to abstain from the throne that it was rightfully his, to be celibate for his lifetime, and to always look after the one or to protect the one who sits on the throne of Hastinapura. If you know the Mahabharata a little bit, you know this is the beginning part of it. So in that moment, you could ask, was that a good choice? Some would say yes, some would say no. Some would say it was an amazing sacrifice. He sacrificed everything for the happiness of his father. Isn't that the duty of a son? To make their father happy and proud. On the other hand, you would say, wow, that's so stupid. He gave up everything that his mother raised him to be. You could say also that the whole Mahabharata would have turned out differently if he hadn't made this choice. Literally, you could go so far and say it was Bhishma's fault that all the millions of soldiers on the battlefield had died. If he hadn't made that choice, or at the very least, if he had broken his vow at some point, that would not have happened. right? But you could say at least in that very moment, you have the two choices. The question about later breaking the vow, not is a different topic. I don't want to speak about now, otherwise it gets too long. But the point I want to make about this example of the Mahabharata in general is life is always messy. It will never be nice and clean and neat how we want it. The same I've seen so often with someone sometimes joke about this. It's a Bhakti Marga thing or whatever. Events are always messy. There is so many variables which sometimes work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the live stream works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the translation works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the event starts on time. Sometimes Guruji comes on time. Sometimes Guruji comes on his own time. Right? Is it good or bad? Is it good that Guruji comes late for darshan sometimes? Many would say no. I know many darshans where Guruji came very late and many new people left because they didn't want to wait. I know many darshans where Guruji came late, and because he came late, some devotees managed to get darshan because otherwise they would have missed it. Right? He knows exactly why and what is going on and who needs what. Right? And there's always a question of perception. Right? But so Jaya and Vijaya, I would take the example for that part of to be aware and conscious of the choices that we make, to be wise and to reflect and to live up to the actions that we make also. Like I spoke about the other day with our bow and arrow. Once we act, we cannot take back that action. And so we have to live up to that reaction of the action that we did. And so it is always advised to think properly before we act. And even if you think wisely and properly before you act, it doesn't mean your action is perfect. Doesn't mean your action is good later on. As we can see with the example of Bhishma. You can say in that moment it was very good. It was very noble to give up everything for his father. But later on, facts, situation change. So sometimes things that we do with a good intent turn out differently also. But the only thing we can do really is work with what we have and make the best out of what we have. Right? So the next story I wanted to take is Kamsa. So Kamsa, I wanted to use as an example for what happens when you have the ability to focus. And I will take another argument later from Narad Muni from the Bhagavatam to showcase this. So you also know the story of Kamsa, right? Life of Krishna. Some people know him as the greatest enemy of Krishna, at least of his Bali Lilas. Because so Kamsa was a great person, was very knowledgeable and very compassionate and very loving, right? But that changed very quickly. Because in one day, after happily marrying off his sister and bringing her and her new husband to their house, there was a voice from the heavens that said, "You fool, the eighth child of your sister will be your doom, which will be your death." And so from that moment, he changed completely. His focus changed completely. Because before, like I said, he was very loving, he was very, especially for his sister, was very dear to him. And so what happened in this moment is that his mindset changed completely from that loving side to fear and hatred. And so you would ask, is that good or bad? Good or bad? The change that he made. It was not a conscious choice, I would say. It was a reactionary choice. But you'd say it was bad. It's not good. He killed all her children. Oh, probably not that good thing to do. Right? But the focus that it created in his mind was what? Before he loved his sister, his focus was on his kingdom, his power, his attachment, his family. From that moment, yes, he had fear, but who was that fear towards? Krishna. Is that good or bad to be focused on Krishna? Right? You'd say it's good. Whether the mood in which you approach Krishna is relevant, we will see later. Because, for example, Narada and Shandilya would argue and disagree on this topic. But let's leave that for now. We'll come back to that later. So his focus changed. He became obsessed and absorbed with that fear of Krishna. And so the fear grew stronger and stronger the closer the birth of Krishna was. So he was so afraid of Krishna even 8 years before his birth. Krishna was the 8th child of Devaki. So he was afraid for years before Krishna was ever even born. And his fear grew as he found out when Krishna's birth had happened, just under his fingertips, basically. And he sent all his demon accomplices and friends to get rid of this Krishna. All the different asuras, Bakasura, Dhenukasura, and all the other asuras, Putana is the first one, to try to get rid of Krishna. Obviously, as we know, nothing worked. Right? And that's what we can see, what happens, separate from the focus, but the mood of fear. That is what is born from fear, is negativity in all different aspects. And that is why each of the aspects of the demons that came represent a different type of fear, a different aspect of fear. And so Krishna killed all of them. And so every single time he kills one of those aspects of fear, what happens within us as devotees? Our distraction become less when we look at it from an inner perspective. When Guruji removes this fear and this fear and this fear, our focus becomes stronger towards God. But for the one who has fear, the less friends he has, the less accomplices he have, the less recognition fear gets, the more afraid and the more powerful it becomes. And such was Kamsa's level of fear also, that the more miracles Krishna did, the more afraid he would get, to an extent in which he stopped being able to sleep. He couldn't sleep anymore. He would even dream of Krishna, being in his room, being under his cushion, being under his bed, waiting behind a curtain, waiting, being in the form of his cooks, having poisoned his food. And that is when you can see what happens with fear comes delusion, right? And so that intensity of that fear becomes so strong that literally there was nothing else in his mind than Krishna. Again, is that bad or is that good? Debatable, at the very least. But when we read the Bhagavad Gita, when we listen to Guruji's satsangs, what do we understand as being the most purifying thing for the mind? What is most purifying? Japam. What is japa? To remember God. But that's what you're supposed to do when you do japam. Sometimes you think of other things, but even if you do Om Namo Narayana, but you're actually somewhere else. But technically, the aim of japa is to actually think of God, right? So what did Kamsa do? You thought of God. He didn't do japa unless it was like, I hate God, I hate God, I hate God. But he constantly remembered Krishna. So the more he was afraid, the more intense the focus became. And so we can see that at the very end of his life, in which he was liberated by Krishna. Krishna defeated him. As he came to Mathura and he fought him, and he defeated him very easily. Because once fear has been deprived of all its accomplices, it is very easy it is very weak, actually. It pretends to be strong, but it is very weak. And so as he liberated Kamsa, what happened to Kamsa? He literally entered into his feet. Is that a bad thing? It's amazing, no? Great yogis in the Himalayas don't attain what he has attained, right? So thinking constantly of Krishna must have had some effect, in terms of a good effect. Even if his approach was not that of loving service, his focus was always there. And so I'll go to the next story and we'll come back, because the verse that I said earlier spoken about Narad Muni kind of combines some of those Lilas and perspectives, right? But the point that I wanted to make with Kamsa is simply the importance of focus. And not just focus, but the intensity of the focus that we have. And so as we are devotees, we should not, or we cannot choose to be his enemy. We have already made his choice, our choice. And so we have to love God. That is our choice. What we have to work on is the intensity in which we love him. Let Kamsa be Kamsa, don't become Kamsa. Okay? We have many other examples that we can follow in terms of mood of service. But intensity, I think Kamsa's intensity was very, very good. Very inspirational. Imagine you get up in the morning and you think Krishna is in the shadows behind you. Or he's waiting for you behind the door of the bathroom. Not to stab you, but, thinking that Krishna is in your food or in the water that you drink. Because he is. But if you have the mood of love, you will start simply to cry. Because you'll see his presence in everything that you do. In every breath that you take, Krishna will be there. And that's the intensity that comes ahead. Just a different mood. The next example that I wanted to take is Shishupal, and that is to show and highlight how the Lord shows his compassion and mercy. So Shishupal, by the Jaya Vijaya, they took their first birth as Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Right? And so the Lord came and defeated him as Lord Varaha and Nrsimhadev. Then again, in the Lila of Rama, which we'll come to afterwards, Jaya and Vijaya incarnated as Ravan and Kumbhakarna. Sometimes I joke, maybe Kumbhakarna is my negative Ishtadev or something. They like sleeping. Kumbhakarna always sleeps, right? Anyways, so Ravan and Kumbhakarna, and the third time he incarnated as Shishupal and Dandavakra. And so it is also said that in some way their manifestations or incarnations became less powerful in the negative sense every time they came back. Right? And so in that last incarnation, in manifestation as Shishupal, do you know the story of Shishupal? Maybe less so than Kamsa, right? So Shishupal was the king of the Chedi kingdom. So he was a very powerful king in Krishna's time. And he had great hatred, or at least jealousy. Let's put it, say jealousy in the beginning of Krishna. And so there was one instance specifically in which that became much bigger, just like erupted like a volcano. And that is the Rajasuya Yagna, which Yudhishthira performed, or was about to perform, to become recognized as the greatest emperor, right? There's the yagna that you do that's called the Rajasuya Yagna. Yeah? And so you made the preparations, he invited all the great kings and all the sages and all the rishis to attend this great yagna. And part of this great yagna is, for it to be fruitful, you have to honor the purest and most honorable person first. Right? And so as Yudhishthira was contemplating on who that is, because that defines the strength or the outcome of the yagna, it has to be a very wise choice. And so as Yudhishthira was reflecting, shortly, he very quickly said, there is no one else even close than Krishna in terms of valor, in terms of qualities, in terms of divinity, obviously. So he chose Krishna. And Shishupal didn't agree with his choice. And so he already verbally attacked Krishna in that instance. And from then on, specifically, he had great hatred for Krishna. But because he had a mother who loved him very much, and the mother, she knew who Krishna is and how compassionate he is. And she also knew about this negative side of her son. And so she went to Krishna and asked him for a boon, for a blessing. And she asked him, please forgive the nature of my son and forgive him even if he insults you 100 times. And Krishna said, I will. And so in a later instance, Shishupal started to insult Krishna. And Krishna warned him, be wary. But he didn't listen. And so he kept insulting Krishna. And at 100th time, 99th time, Krishna said to him, again, a warning. Sooner or later, your punya runs out. Sooner or later, compassion or not, the blessing that I have given only lasts so long. You have one left. I don't know if he counted, but it's like Japam. And so he warned him. Shishupal took no heed to the warning. And so he insulted him again. And it was 101. And so Krishna took his cosmic form and he threw the Sudarshana chakra to remove his head. Would you say that is a good thing, to remove somebody's head? Now, kind of irrelevant if it's Krishna or not. I mean, that's kind of a big relevance of the story, but separately from if that's Krishna, do you think that's a good thing, to remove somebody's head? Not so much. Right? The other question I would ask is, does it sound compassionate to you for the Lord to behead you because you insult him? Hitesh is knitting, you're nicking, nodding. You'd say no. How is it God's compassion if at some point his compassion runs out? It doesn't seem like God. Right? But you have to also see what is the effect on someone who insults God. We already spoke and we know very much about the law of action and reaction. And to insult somebody is not a good thing. What do you think is the karmic consequence of insulting God? Not so good. So by removing him from this existence, from cutting his head, his throat, to stop him from making more insults, he showed his compassion and protection and his love for Shishupal, so that he cannot make more mistakes, more insults, and build karma. As he said, the Lord promised Jaya and Vijay that he will come in every life for their own protection and to liberate them. And the reason for why they chose to become demons 3 times and not devotees is because they said, we don't want to become attached to this world. What would have happened, or what would happen if they say one insult too much? They create karma. And with karma comes attachment and bondage. And they would have to come back again to get rid of that karma. And so actually, to protect him, he removed his head. That is also what is compassion. So again, it simply depends on how you look at the bigger picture. Again, like I said in the beginning also, that we don't really understand the Lord's plan. And depending on who you are and what relationship you have, the way that you will look at it is very different, or will be very different. The difference of how the Kauravas looked at the defeat of Duryodhan, or how Bhishma would look at the defeat of Duryodhan, or how the Pandavas look at the defeat of Duryodhan, or his mother looks at the defeat of her son, is very different. Because Gandhari knew about the qualities of her son, and she still blamed Krishna for the war. Right? So it always depends on how subjective you are and what is your perception. And so I wanted to use this story to highlight how the Lord is Bhakta Vatsala, as we know that term. He's always the one who's looking out for his devotees. He always looks out for all of us. Whether we are demonic in nature or divine in nature, the Lord will always look, or in terms of the actions that he does, will always be beneficial to us. And that goes the same, as hard as it is to understand or to accept, with everything that happens in this world. Do you know that Rishi Aradhaka shared a story some time ago? I think it was in this interview, YouTube, whatever, with Swami Keshava, about his daughter. Right? Do you know the story? Right? So would you say it is right that a child has to die at a very young age? No. But what do we know? Would we want a soul? Would we, as a soul, if you pretend that you know who you are in truth, I am my soul, would you want to be trapped longer in this body than you have to? No, because the soul wants to be free. So as soon as the soul has completed what it came here to do, it will want to give up its body. But because we are so identified with this body, we don't want to. We want to force the soul to stay here. Right? And so it always depends on perception. You could say the same thing about natural disasters and earthquakes and the fire in Hawaii recently, or whatever it may be. It is terrible. But yet it is God's plan. And it is not because God is punishing or because God hates. It is because God loves every single living being, every part of himself, not to forget. We are all parts of himself. So how could he hate anyone or anything? Everything is part of him. That means he would hate parts of himself. He is not that insecure. I'm assuming. Right? And so he shows his love and compassion to everyone. Whether we understand it in that way or not is our problem. But there will never be a moment in which he doesn't love someone or a being. And as we understand from the Gita, the first teachings of Krishna, right? Arjuna, you're whining and complaining about killing or being killed, but you are not this body. The wise do not complain or cry for the living nor for the dead. Right? Yes, it is very difficult to understand, but that is his reality. And so he will always be, that is the most compassionate that looks out for us. And it doesn't mean that he needs to chop off our head. Oh, it doesn't come to that. But at the same time, you can also see, what does the head represent? The head represents the mind and the ego, the seat of the ego identity, the false identification with that self, with that body self. And so yes, he cut off his head, but Guruji is cutting off our head all the time also. Because he's trying to cut off these attachments that we have to this material world. Trying to cut off this identification that we have with this ahankar, with this ego, and the reason for why we have to come back again and again and again. So by sometimes treating us strictly, which we see as, this is not compassionate, this is not loving, he's treating us strictly so that we can attain the supreme goal, the supreme freedom, right? So the next that I wanted to take is Ravan. So Ravana, you know the story of Rama? Just a little bit overview-wise, yeah? So Ravana, I wanted to take is in the connection of what happens when you have attachments and desire. And I think we know that very well. We can relate to that, all of us. Because Ravan was an extremely knowledgeable and wise person. He knew all the scriptures and literatures. He was a great, great devotee of Lord Shiva. Some say the greatest devotee of Shiva was Ravan. And he also knew who Rama is. He knew who Rama is. But because of his lust and his desire, his mind, his judgment and his discrimination was clouded completely. And that is why he lost himself. And so you could say the same thing. Was it compassionate of Lord Ram to kill him? Is it compassionate of the Lord to kill anyone? But what is it that he killed? He killed that quality that we have to overcome also, which is desire, attachment, anger, and more than anything, lust. Right? In chapter 16, that is one of the three that he highlights: kama, krodha, and lobha, greed, lust, which is one of the worst qualities which will blind us and bring us towards on the wrong path. As I said earlier, the example, whether it is the attachment towards a little innocent deer or whether it's the lust after a prostitute, you can be as wise and as knowledgeable and as detached as you want. If you're not cautious, you can always fall. And that is why Ravan was killed. How? By Rama. What is the weapon of Rama? The bow and arrow. Because the arrow, as I said the other day, he brings discrimination and it brings freedom from greed. That is why he chose the bow and arrow. Because the only way to remove and to stay safe from desire, greed, and anger is by having a single-pointed, focused mind on that you want to achieve and attain, which is the Supreme Lord. That is a quality that an archer needs to have. Otherwise, you will never be a good archer. Just as Arjuna managed to hid the eye of the fish just by looking into the reflection of it turning around above him. Such was the ability of Arjun to focus and to have us cut out everything else from his mind and from anything that could be distracting. And it is the same thing that we can learn from Ravan also, is that it is very dangerous and we can be walking on very thin ice if we are not cautious of the lusty desires and attachments that we create. And so sometimes something may seem like a very small thing, like a very small habit that is maybe not beneficial. But you do something once, you do something twice, it becomes easier the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time. And before you know, it will turn into a strong, fixed habit in your mind and in your daily life, which is then very difficult to remove. And it's the same thing with Ravan also. He was a very great person, very knowledgeable, very wise, and very devoted. But you become distracted once, and you're not cautious enough, you can go astray very easily. And there's something to be very conscious of. That's why I wanted to choose Ravan, because it's so important. Yet, I know it's a bit depressing, right? Yet, once you have taken shelter at his feet, whether at God, let's put God, you will always be safe. It doesn't matter how astray you go, he will always personally come to drag you back in whatever way he sees fit. That sometimes might be subtle, it sometimes might not be subtle, right? Sometimes he might give you time, sometimes he might not give you time. That depends what is best for you. But that's what we can see with Ravan. He has surrendered. He was very devoted to Lord Shiva. That's what we can see. I spoke about Govardhan Lilas some time ago. And I said that I was on online satsangs. And said once you take shelter at Krishna's feet, once you make the choice to go under Govardhan Hill in the shelter of Krishna, he will never let go of you. You can try your best to run away from Krishna. You can try your best to ignore God. You will fail. Because Krishna is very annoying. And so if you don't want to love him, if you don't want him to be in your life, he will come to you and he will break things and he will steal things and he will do all kinds of havocs in your life until you realize that, oops, this is Krishna trying to get back my attention. So you can do whatever you want. But once you have surrendered to him, and that might sound scary for the mind, but for me, it is the most reassuring thing that I have in my life. Knowing that I don't trust myself, I'm not trustworthy, because I have a mind, and it is not controlled. And as long as one has an uncontrolled mind, you can never be trusted. You can never trust it. But I know that he will always be there to look out for me and to make sure that even if I go astray, he will bring me back to the right path. That's what you can see with Jaya and Vijay, with Narayana, who continuously lives up to his promise. No matter how savage, wild they go on their various incarnations, manifestations in the world, he personally comes to bring them back. And that's what we can see with these Lilas in manifestations. So the next one is a story that I wanted to share that Guruji told 2 or 3 times before. And that is the story of a king. And that king had a minister who had a guru. And he would go to this guru and he asked about, complained and asked about some problems that he had in his life. And his guru gave only one answer. And he said, everything is fine and everything is going according to plan. And he said, make this your mantra and everything will be fine and everything will be going according to plan. And so he made this his mantra and he took his word, the word of his guru, as the most important thing. And so happened that in his palace where he was working as a prime minister, there was a guard, security guard, who lost his job. And so he came to complain to the prime minister, and the prime minister said, everything is fine, everything is going according to plan. How would you feel when you lose your job, when you're fired by your boss? And somebody says that to you. And if you actually liked your job, sorry, I have to specify, okay? Otherwise you will say the same thing. It's fine, I'm happy, right? No, if you actually liked it, right? You will not be very happy, right? I was very upset, so you just left the room. It's like, oh, whatever. I have to, what is this idiot giving me advice? And so there was, in the same palace, there was a cook. And so the cook went to the prime minister and he asked him for advice, or he complained. And he said, my wife cheated on me and she left with another cook. What should I do? And so the prime minister said, everything is fine and everything is going according to plan. And so he was very upset. Imagine your husband or your wife cheats on you and somebody gives you this advice. I don't know if you would like it. Probably not. I hope not. Right? So, cook, very upset, he rushes out. He meets the guard. It's like, what is this idiot? Like, they tell each other the stories, but we have to get back at his prime minister. I don't know what he has gone screws loose. And so, while this was happening, there was a barber, in the personal barber of the king. And so he was shaving the king, this royal shave, and he slipped, and he cut a little bit from the king's throat. And there was a lot of blood coming, and the king was very upset and very angry. It's not very good. Right? Back in the day, you lose your head for this kind of things. Right? So very upset. So out of fear, the barber ran away, and they kicked him out, and he said, you're fired, blah, And so he came out, and he saw the cook and the guard standing there. He told them everything what happened, and so the both of them they saw an opportunity to get back at the minister, and so they went to the king and said, "Oh my God, what happened to you? You're bleeding. You know what happened? We told the minister what happened, and you know what he said? Everything is fine, and everything is going according to plan." It's terrible. How could he say such a thing? And so the king gets super upset, and he calls the minister being dragged by his hair to the court, and says, "What did you say? I was cut and I'm bleeding. What did you say? What would you say?" And the prime minister just says, "Everything is fine and everything is going according to plan." And so the king is very upset, outraged, and he says, "Throw this idiot to the dungeons." So he got imprisoned. And so the next day, on a Wednesday, which was the day in which the king always used to go hunting, he would usually always go hunting with the prime minister. So they would go hunting on the way back. They would talk about affairs of state and whatever else. But as he was in the dungeon, he had to go alone. So we went hunting. So at the same time, in this forest, there lived a tribe. And this tribe were devotees of Kali Ma. And in some regions, the priest of the tribe said, I feel it's time for a sacrifice to make Mother Kali happy. And so he sent the tribe out to look for a worthy sacrifice. And so they came across this king. And so they captured him and they brought him to the priest. And the king was screaming, "How dare you? I am the king. Let go of me." And the priest said, "Ooh, you're the king. There's even a better offering. Not as normal people, you get the king. Mama will be very happy." Right? And so he said, "Go and prepare him for the sacrifice." So they went to take him, to wash him and to clean him, to make him ready, make some for the sacrifice. Has to be nice, no? And so as they were cleaning him, they saw that he had a cut on his neck, a fresh cut. And so they, in shock, they went to the priest and they said, "We cannot offer this guy. We cannot offer this king. He's impure. His skin is broken. You cannot offer him to Kali. She will not be happy." And so the priest looked at the wound. He said, no, we cannot offer him. This is not good." So they let him go. And so the king went back to his palace and he went to the dungeons straight away and he realized the wisdom of his minister. And he asked him for forgiveness and he said, "You were right. Everything is fine and everything is going according to plan. Because if the barber hadn't cut me, I would be dead now." And the prime minister smiles and he laughs and he says, "Everything is fine and everything is going according to plan. Because if you had not thrown me in the prison, I would have gone with you hunting. And as they would not have offered you, they would have offered me. So everything is fine and everything is going according to plan." And so I really like this story because it makes us understand that we don't really understand anything of life. Because he has a plan and he knows exactly what is going on. And so sometimes some things happen which we label as bad, but later on they turn out to be the greatest experiences in our life that changed, that transformed us in the biggest way. The biggest changes and transformations come from the biggest disappointments sometimes. Right? And so it is just to try to have a bigger perception of life, of reality, especially when we go through hardships, which is the time when it is most difficult, obviously. So I'm going over a little bit already, but obviously Diwali is about Lakshmi. And so on this topic, I think it is very fitting. As I said in the beginning, Diwali is about bringing light to the darkness, right? And so in Diwali, in these 3 days, we've been worshipping Goddess Lakshmi as the one who is the most compassionate mother, the one who gives wealth, who gives everything in various ways, whether it's in terms of wealth, gold, health, rain, food, abundance. She's a Devi of abundance, and she gives everything in fullness. Right? But we also know that everything in nature has to be balanced. And so, as it is with Lakshmi, is that wherever there is Lakshmi, Lakshmi is known to have an elder sister called Jeshta. Jeshta means elder. So she has an elder sister called Alakshmi. A is the opposite. And so as we see Lakshmi being so opulent, beautiful, all these different weapons and saris and jewelry, she gives fullness, she gives all these benefits in terms of wealth and health and everything. Lakshmi is always accompanied by her older sister, which is Alakshmi. Naturally, is always there. And so as we can see, with our Lakshmi is that she is the exact opposite of Lakshmi. She is completely naked. She is found where everything is dirty and filthy, where there is negativity and destruction. That is where our Lakshmi is. It is an aspect of Lakshmi. It is the balancing aspect of her. Right? So when we go through the different 8, the Ashtalakshmis, which we can see here, each one has an accompanying Alakshmi to her. So when we have, so if Lakshmi is, for example, if Lakshmi is gold, Alakshmi is the aspect that comes along with the production and the environmental pollution that comes with the production of gold. She also comes with, what comes with gold also is desire and attachment. And so that is also our Lakshmi. It is when Lakshmi comes in the form of rain, as she's abundantly giving, our Lakshmi is either the aspect of drought or of flood. So both extremes. Our Lakshmi is also, when Lakshmi comes in the form of Dhanya Lakshmi, or the aspect of Dhanya Lakshmi, the aspect of Lakshmi giving grain or harvest, our Lakshmi is the one who is the opposite, who is the aspect that comes with the destruction of nature through harvest, who is the one who's the destruction of the harvest through drought and flood, for example. If Lakshmi is, for example, comes as Santana Lakshmi, which is here, the one who's holding the baby, she is giving blessing of the baby. But Alakshmi is that aspect which comes in the form of suffering and pain that it takes to give birth to the baby. So that is Alakshmi. Right? Maybe the Prabhus don't know. Probably the mothers know, probably, what it's not the most comfortable thing in your life to give birth to a baby. I'm assuming. Right? I'm just not from experience in this life. Maybe in last life. Apparently I was a Mataji in my last life, so I don't know if I had children. So, in the aspect of Vijaya Lakshmi, which we have here, up here, the Lakshmi which gives victory and success, she comes in the aspect of defeat. Because whenever somebody is victorious, somebody else will be defeated. Right? When Lakshmi comes in the aspect of Dhana Lakshmi, which is here, the aspect of wealth, our Lakshmi is associated with exploitation, corruption, and even crime. Because that is also what comes with wealth. Right? So Lakshmi herself always balances. Everything in life, everything in nature always balances. And it's the same with on the spiritual path in terms of actions. We have to come to this mind state of equanimity in which we don't create this imbalance because of attachment towards either side of duality. We accept the reality of duality, and by transcending it, we come to a state of equanimity in which we don't go into either. And that is what Lakshmi is ultimately teaching and giving in that aspect. So we give light, knowledge. That is why we light the lamp on Diwali, to dispel our Lakshmi, which is darkness, ignorance, negativity. So as I said, our Lakshmi is also often identified as the goddess of misfortune, called Nirriti, and she is usually found wherever there is dirt, filth, crime, poverty, and so on. That's why Guruji makes it such an important thing that our ashram is always clean. Guruji is a very clean person. This is the house of Lakshmi, not our Lakshmi. And Lakshmi always likes it clean. right? And so, coming to the last part, I wanted to share two very beautiful verses from Narad Muni as a kind of closing, to again kind of close up this whole topic that we spoke about Kamsa. We spoke about the different demons such as Ravan and the original Lila of those manifestations with Jaya and Vijaya. Understand what is good, what is bad, and so on. And so Narad Muni in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 7, Chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, he says, "Therefore, by enmity or by devotional service, by fear, by affection, or by lusty desires, by all of these or any one of them, if a conditioned soul somehow or other concentrates his mind upon the Lord, the result is the same. For the Lord, because of his blissful position, is never affected by enmity or friendship." In other words, for him, it doesn't matter how you approach him, as I kind of started in the beginning. It doesn't matter how you approach him, because simply the remembrance of him will make that transformation happen. What matters to him is the intensity of your relationship and the intensity of your focus on your relationship with him. What that relationship looks like in terms of bhav is irrelevant for him. That is what Narad Muni says. And so he continues, "By devotional service, one cannot achieve such intense absorption in thought of the Supreme Lord as one can through enmity towards him. This is my opinion." And so Narad Muni, he's not telling us to become demons, just to make this clear. He's not trying to inspire us to hate God. He's a devotee of God. But as he makes it clear in this verse, in his opinion, what is most important, that is a point that he makes here, is the absorption that we have on the Lord, on the remembrance of the Lord. And in his opinion, it is more easy to be absorbed in negativity than in positivity towards the Lord. So Shandilya, in the Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, kind of says the opposite. He doesn't agree with Narad Muni. And so when Guruji spoke about Shandilya Bhakti Sutra, he mentioned this verse also. And he said Narad Muni would not agree. And so I would take out the point that Narad Muni makes, whether, obviously, as I said, he's not trying to inspire to become asuras. Because what Guruji said also is that you think it's easy to hate God. You think it's easy to hate him to such a degree like they did. It's not. It may sound easier because we know how easy it is to become negative. We know how easy it is to follow in our habits and negativities and jealousies and whatever it may be. But to have it directed in such an intensity towards God, not easy. And so, obviously, what is recommended is that which also is more comfortable and enjoyable. Right? Because one of the descriptions of God, as we come back to the beginning, who is God? In the Taittiriya Upanishad, in the 2nd chapter, God is described as bliss, as pure, immaculate, everlasting bliss. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita, also in chapter 6, Krishna speaks on how it is possible to experience that inner joy and that bliss. And he gives the exact guidance and exact tools on how we have to do that. Concentrate, focus, and control the senses, the indriyas, to go within and to focus one's mind on him by repeated practice, by renunciation. Only in this way, it is possible. And so, to finish with this verse, there's a lot of things that we can learn from this Lilas, from the different things that God has come to make us realize and to learn. So I kind of made a small list. So first we spoke about difficult choices, to be conscious and self-aware of the actions that we do and their consequences. The acceptance of His presence in our life and in every breath of our life. That there are many things in life that we cannot control, and ultimately He is the driver in the vehicle that we call body. And so we need to learn to accept life. Everything is fine, and everything is going perfectly according to His plan. Right? And once we accept, acceptance is such an important step, not just for our own experience of life and happiness and joy, but acceptance is also the very first step in how you can actually transform. Because acceptance doesn't necessarily mean everything is perfect the way it is, the way that you are and the way that you think. It just simply means that you accept the way that you are at the moment. That doesn't mean you can't improve. So acceptance of your current position is the first step to actually being able to transform and change. So the next point, transformation, focus, through focus, to attain the state of equanimity, to understand that the Lord has supreme compassion, and He will always be by and on your side. Whether you perceive it that way or not is actually irrelevant to Him, not to you, to Him. And so accept and understand also that He will always love you. And you will never be able to love Him more than He loves you. And so the only thing that we can do is to love Him with all our heart, to accept the love that He has for us, and to do our best to engage and accept the love that He has put in our life. And the way to do that is not to worry. We repeat the mantra every single day. At the very end of our day, every day, right? We chant Sarvadharmam Parijyajya Mamekam Sharam Vraja. We give everything to Him. We say, I don't worry because I have you in my life. I don't worry because I have surrendered to you. Why is there ever a need to worry? Why then do we still do it? Remember that He will always love you. And whatever He may do, everything that He gives you in life is an affirmation of that love. And His desire to bring you to the highest goal. And the same goal obviously goes for Guruji, who is the manifestation of that supreme love in your life. So we cannot ever be enough grateful for what we have, and to be conscious about what is possible to attain. Like Guruji said yesterday so beautifully, if you want, you can attain Him now. Now. Not tomorrow, not next life, now. But that is a choice that you have to make. And according to that choice, there is certain effort and certain mindset that you have to develop. But it is, and for me I see that as a promise that Guruji makes. If He says it is possible to attain Him now, I assume it is possible. As much as I don't think I can do it, as much as I doubt I have in my own ability, I do trust Him. That He, at the very least, for my understanding, material understanding, at least I think that He knows better than me. And so if He says it is possible, it must be possible. And so does Krishna. Krishna also says it is possible. And so who am I to think that it is not? Right? And so I wanted to end with one last amazing verse from the Bhagavatam. And it is for me the key. And for me the key is that which Guruji has made the key, which is to simply remember the Supreme Lord. And not just to remember Him, but to remember Him in awe. Because if you have such relationship with Him, everything will disappear. Everything will cease to exist in terms of attractiveness. Because He is the most sweetest. He is the most beautiful. He is the most radiant and most shining. And so why would you ever look at anything else? Right? So it says in the 4th canto, chapter 7, verse 23 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the presence of the glaring effulgence of the bodily luster of Narayana, everyone else's luster faded away, and everyone stopped speaking. Fearful with awe and veneration, all present touched their hands to their heads and prepared to offer their prayers to the Supreme Lord Adokshaja, or Krishna. And that is what, for me, what he explained so beautifully last night, what Diwali is really about. It is that light, that flame is Lakshmi. And she is the one who brings that light into our life, so that she is a guiding star that we can follow, which will make us realize that which is described in this verse. That once you see that supreme being, that supreme effulgent, bright light, effulgent Narayana, the only thing you can do is lift up your hands and try to close your mouth. That they say, they stop speaking, but if you see something so beautiful, your jaw just drops down. Because it's so beautiful. And so that is what I wish and hope for everybody to be able to see by the grace of Guruji. Jai Guru.